Welcome to this story, one of the most unsettling cases ever noted in Kentucky. Before we dive in, share in the comments where you're tuning in from and the exact time you started listening. It's always interesting to see the different places and hours of the day or night where these stories reach. The year was 1847, and the small town of Marion County, Kentucky, had grown used to quiet days. The convent of Our Lady of Bethlehem, a modest two-story brick structure atop a slope just outside of Loretto, was known for its gardens, its silence, and the ring of its evening bells. The nuns of that house, 10 women in all, were respected for their discipline and charity. No one in the county suspected that within those high stone walls, an event was unfolding that would one day shake the diocese to its core. At the time, Kentucky stood at a crossroads, half southern, half frontier. Slavery was common, though seldom discussed openly in religious institutions. Even the Sisters of Loretto, whose records still survive, had quietly held bondspeople for labor, a fact history rarely repeats aloud. Among them was a man named Samuel, purchased from a Lexington trader in 1840 and assigned to the convent as a caretaker and groundsman. His name appears only twice in ledgers, once beside the entry Negro servant for the chapel garden, and again, 7 years later, beside 3 words, taken ill, buried quietly. But the surviving private correspondence from that year tells another story. Letters from the convent's accountant, Brother Julian Marr, reveal concern from the diocesan office in Bardstown. "Strange rumors have reached us," he wrote to the Mother Superior. 10 professed sisters, each of them visited by the same shame. The matter must be addressed discreetly. Locals would later whisper that all 10 women had begun showing signs of pregnancy, one after another, though none ever left the grounds. The physician who examined them was ordered to silence by the church. Parishioners only noticed that the convent stopped ringing its bells. In April of that year, a storm broke over the county, flooding nearby fields and forcing travelers to shelter in barns. A farmer named Elias Boone, whose property bordered the convent's rear garden, swore he saw lanterns moving in the rain long past midnight. "They weren't the sisters," he said. "They were too tall. There was a man with them, or something that walked like one." When the floodwaters receded, the convent's garden soil had been turned and smoothed flat, as if freshly tilled. Days later, Brother Julian was transferred out of state, and no one ever spoke of the matter again. But the town remembered, and so did the ground behind the convent. When summer arrived in 1847, the convent's walls seemed to tighten around their secret. The gardens grew wild, the chapel curtains were drawn, and the bell that once marked the Angelus remained still. Only the townsfolk noticed the subtle changes: fewer hymns during Sunday service, more carriages arriving after dusk. Those who listened carefully claimed to hear a child's cry carried on the evening wind, faint and quickly hushed. The bishop's office in Bardstown, already strained by scandals surrounding other religious houses such as the Sisters of Loretto, sent inquiries. The Mother Superior, Sister Amara Divine, replied with polite denials and a ledger listing each sister's duties. Yet the convent's purchase records from that year reveal an unusual shipment: cloth, milk, and laudanum in quantities that no silent order could ever justify. In September, the local physician, Dr. Cyrus Vale, was called to the convent under strict confidentiality. He would later confess in a sealed letter found after his death. "They brought me into a low chamber by lamplight. The air was close, thick with rosemary. There were infants 3, perhaps 4, each pale as candle wax. The sisters wept but said nothing. Only one spoke, the slave Samuel, who watched from the door. He said, 'They ain't mine, doctor, they belong to the house.'" By the end of that year, all traces of those children vanished. County records note several small graves near the convent's orchard, unmarked except for flat stones. One was later found opened, empty. Rumors spread that the bishopric had intervened quietly, transferring the sisters to other houses or cloisters. But some locals insisted the convent still held all 10. their voices echoing softly through the stone hallways long after midnight. The parish sexton's daughter told her teacher that she had seen a line of women walking barefoot through the garden, each holding a child made of shadow. When Samuel fell ill that winter, he refused to enter the chapel again. His final words were recorded by the parish clerk. "I served the Lord, but the Lord never came here. What's buried here still breathes." The convent shuttered its doors for renovations in 1848, though no workmen were ever hired. When it reopened 3 years later, the nuns were new, the walls freshly plastered, and the garden replaced by gravel. But when the first rain fell, the ground sank in neat rows, as though the earth remembered where the bodies lay. Even today, the ledgers from that year bear faint watermarks, shapes resembling tiny hands pressed into the margins. The archivists in Bardstown call them smudges. The locals call them reminders. By 1849, the events surrounding the convent had become a closed chapter in the church's official memory, but the people of Marion County had not forgotten. The new sisters who arrived spoke in measured tones and claimed to know nothing of what had transpired before them. Yet the villagers swore that, on certain nights, the chapel still glowed faintly blue, as though its stone walls retained their own light. The first to break the silence was Father Benedict Harlan, a young priest newly assigned from Bardstown to act as the convent's confessor. His journals, discovered decades later among diocesan papers, describe his early visits as peaceful if unusually tense. But within months his tone changed. "The sisters are kind but guarded. They ask not for absolution but for silence. When I sit in the confessional, I hear breathing on both sides of the screen." Harlan noted another strange discovery. The parish donation ledger for 1848 had been tampered with. 10 entries, all written in the same careful hand, listed anonymous penance offerings, each one for the exact amount required to purchase a child's burial plot. "The handwriting," he wrote, "matches that of Sister Amara Divine, long deceased." One night in late autumn, Harlan was awakened by the sound of footsteps moving through the convent cloister. He followed them into the chapel, where he found a faint line of light emerging from beneath the altar. Beneath it, he discovered a narrow stair leading to a crypt-like space that no plan of the building had ever shown. Inside were small wooden coffers, 10 in number, each wrapped in faded linen. On the lids, pressed into the wood, was the faint impression of a hand, some large, some childlike. In the 11th coffer, instead of remains, he found a small journal bound in skin-thin parchment. It bore no title, only the initial S. The pages were filled with meticulous handwriting, describing dreams of rivers that sang and of women burdened with light. One passage, underlined in red ink, read, "We shared him because he was not ours. He was the church's shadow, sent to bear what none of us could confess aloud." The next morning, Father Harlan left for Bardstown to report what he'd found. He was never seen again. The bishop's office received a sealed envelope with no return mark, containing only his crucifix and a scrap of paper that read, "They are not dead, the prayers keep them walking." In later years, scholars would quietly compare this account to the hidden history of the Sisters of Loretto, whose archives confirm the quiet dismissal of 10 unnamed nuns during the 1840s. Their reasons were listed simply as health and conduct unbecoming. But for those who lived near the old convent, the story endured. On rainy nights, they said, you could still hear a child crying just beyond the garden wall, never wailing, only breathing like a hymn half-remembered. By the early months of 1850, whispers from the convent had reached the diocese again, this time through unsigned letters postmarked from Bardstown. The handwriting was feminine, refined, and remarkably similar across each envelope, yet each claimed to be written by a different sister. One began with the line, "We are not lost, but we are being remembered wrongly." The bishop's secretary, Monsignor Duval, kept the correspondence sealed for years, but fragments have survived in parish archives. They tell of strange lights in the crypt beneath the convent and of a presence that walks at matins, never seen yet always felt. The writer speaks of a figure that stands where the altar's shadow falls, and of voices that whisper names not found in any registry. Duval ordered a visitation, an official investigation of the house. The church dispatched Father Leontius Ward, a Jesuit known for his composure. His report, dated March 1850, survives only in summary. All sisters in apparent health, no violations of vows observable, yet the walls hum at night and the chapel smells of milk. The convent slave deceased 3 years prior, however, his quarters remain tended daily as though occupied. In a private note, Ward confessed to his own unease. He wrote that while walking the garden, he found rows of small depressions in the gravel, like the outlines of cradles or shallow graves of infants laid head to foot. That same week, the convent's bell tolled 13 times during the midnight hour, though no sister was on duty. The iron tongue struck itself, witnesses said, as if commanded by memory. The sisters of Loretto, whose central house stood just miles away, refused to speak publicly about the incident. Their own records from that decade were later found damaged by water, but one marginal note remains legible beside a list of transferred nuns. House of Bethlehem, closed for good reason. By 1852, the convent was formally dissolved. Its grounds were purchased by the church for silence rather than use. Local boys who trespassed through the ruins claimed to find small handprints baked into the stone, like those of children pressing from within. One of them, years later, would recall hearing singing from below the chapel, a lullaby that didn't end right, like it lost its words halfway. Even today, the ledgers in the diocesan archives show 10 missing sisters, all struck from record in a single stroke of ink. Beside the deletion line appears a faint notation, the kind made by clerks to mark an unresolved entry. Revisions pending, God will correct. No one ever did. After the convent's closure in 1852, the church moved quickly to erase its traces from public record. The property was sold to a private benefactor, one Thomas Bellamy, a merchant from Lexington known for his donations to local parishes. But the sale was little more than a veil. The deed lists the buyer, yet the payment was made by the Diocese of Bardstown itself. The structure remained uninhabited, its keys kept in a locked drawer in the bishop's residence. Still, the land could not be silenced. Locals who worked the nearby fields told of flickering lights near the old chapel, long after the building's consecration had been revoked. When the Sisters of Loretto expanded their main academy in 1854, one anonymous chronicler recorded a single line in the community annals. Let no convent be founded where the bells have forgotten to ring. That summer Bellamy vanished. His wagon was found overturned on the road to Lebanon, its horse missing, the driver's seat slick with rain. In the back, beneath tarpaulin and grain, searchers found a wooden crate marked with a cross. Inside lay cloth robes, 10 in number, each sealed in wax and folded as though for burial. A single rosary rested atop them, its beads darkened with something that wasn't rust. The church retrieved the box quietly, offering no comment. Only the gravedigger, Eli Crane, spoke of what he'd seen. They weren't robes, he told his son years later. They were shrouds, and they were too small. Over the following decade, the land was left to rot. The chapel's roof collapsed inward, ivy overtook the cloister walls, and the crypt beneath the altar, sealed by Father Ward's hand, was said to hum faintly during storms. Travelers passing through the area spoke of a sweet, sour smell drifting from the ruins. One soldier, returning home after the Mexican War, claimed to have heard chanting, soft as sleep, coming from under the stones. In 1856, a young seminarian assigned to inventory the abandoned properties wrote his final report. The foundation stones appear stained as if by long seepage. Some stones move when stepped upon. Beneath them I hear trickling, either water or breath. He died of fever that same winter, though his letters home mentioned no illness. His last sentence reads only, "They have not gone. They are praying through the walls." By 1860, the ruins had acquired a new name among locals, the House of Silence. Even farmers who passed nearby avoided speaking when within sight of the hill. It was said that any prayer uttered there was repeated back, syllable for syllable, by a voice not one's own. And every year when the convent's founding date came round again, the air grew heavy and the sound of a bell, one deep, one faint, was heard rolling through the valley, not rung by hand but by memory. By the spring of 1862, the Civil War had drawn soldiers and supply lines through Kentucky, yet few dared to camp near the ruins of the old convent. The hill was considered cursed ground, a place where lanterns burned low and horses refused to drink. One Union corporal, William Latch, wrote in a letter home, "We bivouacked by an abandoned chapel tonight. The men swear they hear women singing under the earth. I thought it the wind until the words took shape, Latin prayers clear and even, but there are no houses for miles." That report was dismissed, but by summer more units had written similar accounts. Drummers claimed their cadence would falter, echoing back as if the ground itself kept time. Some soldiers buried their campfires in haste, fearing the sound of footsteps matching their own. When the war ended, a handful of veterans returned to search the site, driven by rumor. They found the foundations cracked open by frost and one surviving wall, blackened but still standing. On its inner surface faint script was visible, painted not in ink but soot. The words, written in imperfect Latin, translated roughly to 10 voices, one vow, buried alive for grace. Among the debris, they unearthed a rusted handbell of convent make, its clapper fused into place. When shaken, it produced no sound, until the following night, when its muffled tone echoed through the valley without touch. Locals called it the bell of forgiven voices. The diocese quietly reclaimed it, locking it within their Bardstown archives beside the correspondence from Father Leontius Ward. It was Ward's earlier writings on the Sisters of Loretto that first tied this event to church history. His surviving notes remarked that some Loretto houses had been burdened by irregularities before 1850, and that Bardstown's clergy preferred holy silence to scandal. Whether he referred to Bethlehem Convent or another, the timing matched too closely to ignore. By 1865, the ruins had been buried under new soil and designated as a pauper's field. Yet farmers working nearby swore that every spring, when plowing the first furrows, their blades struck stone beneath the topsoil, arranged in a perfect circle. Each stone, they said, rang faintly when disturbed, like a distant choir trapped underfoot. The last official survey of the land, conducted by engineer Miles Grover in 1866, described a low subterranean resonance beneath the southern slope. His notes end abruptly. "Cannot explain vibration. Windless day, feels like breathing under the ground." When Grover failed to file his final report, the church sent another clerk in his place. The replacement returned pale and wordless. His only written comment, tucked into the margins of Grover's draft, reads, "The song stopped when I spoke my name aloud." The site has been quiet ever since, or so the records claim. Yet on certain nights when thunder drifts across the valley, the people of Marion County still pause in their prayers, waiting for the faintest echo of that long-buried hymn. By 1868, what had once been called the House of Silence was barely a ruin. Vines had swallowed the chapel stones, and the wild roots of the nearby oaks had pushed through the crypt's roof. Locals avoided the site, saying the air there smelled like burned sugar, sweet and spoiled at once. The church denied the place had ever existed, yet its outline lingered on county maps, an unnamed rectangle on the southern ridge. That year, the land was leased to a farmer named Caleb Minton, who hoped to reclaim it for pasture. Minton was a pragmatic man, a war veteran who scoffed at ghost stories. Within a week of clearing the rubble, he sent a note to the county clerk. "The soil here isn't natural. When I plow, I hit stone that rings." Digging deeper, he uncovered blackened timbers and what he first took to be lumps of coal. But when the rains came, the coal dissolved into gray ash, leaving faint white shapes beneath, perfect outlines of human hands pressed into the earth. They were too small to be adult, too deliberate to be accident. Minton fenced the site off and never plowed there again. 2 months later, strange sounds began to rise from the barn he had built nearby, soft, rhythmic tapping that echoed through the night. His hired hand, Elias Boone, swore it was coming from the ground. "Like someone knocking from below," he said. When Boone pried up a floorboard, he found a thin layer of soot and a single piece of rosary bead buried in the dirt, one half white, one half black. The next morning, all the horses had broken loose. Their tracks led straight toward the hill where the chapel once stood and stopped abruptly at its edge, as if they had vanished mid-stride. Minton packed up his belongings that same week. His departure papers list his reason simply as ground unsound. When church representatives arrived to inspect the site, they recorded an unusual phenomenon: fine ash seeping through cracks in the soil, like smoke without source. Their report was sealed, but a brief line appears in a diocesan index entry for 1869. Former property of Bethlehem, unfit for consecration, cause unknown. That same year, a schoolgirl from Lebanon, Kentucky, fell ill after visiting the ridge. In her delirium, she spoke in Latin prayers no one had taught her, repeating a single phrase again and again: "We are still singing." By then, the legend had already taken new form. The villagers no longer spoke of scandal, only of the sound that rose before storms, a faint chorus drifting from beneath the ash-covered hill. They called it the hidden choir of Bethlehem, and when the wind blew through the trees just right, it seemed to hum a single, haunting note. In 1870, a new chapter opened, quietly, almost accidentally, when a young nun from the Sisters of Loretto was sent to Lebanon to assist with parish records. Her name was Sister Mercy Duval, and her obedience led her directly into the story the church had tried for decades to bury. While sorting through dusty boxes of financial ledgers and baptismal notes, she uncovered a small packet tied in blue ribbon. Inside were 10 folded letters addressed to the Mother of Bethlehem. Each was unsigned, each written in a different hand, yet all bore the same opening line: "He visits us again and we endure in silence." The letters described pregnancies, miscarriages, and the births of infants who did not draw breath but looked upon us with eyes too knowing. The tone was not confession, it was plea. Each writer begged the Mother Superior for release from the covenant of blood. Sister Mercy, shaken, brought the letters to her superior at Bardstown, who ordered her never to speak of them again. But she kept a copy of one, which survives in her private notebook now held in the Loretto archives. It reads: "We were told it was charity, that to share him was to cleanse him, but his touch burned the same in every cell. He prays without moving his lips, and the garden listens." A year later, Sister Mercy began hearing sounds she could not explain, footsteps in her cell, a faint humming that seemed to come from beneath the floorboards. Her confessor dismissed it as exhaustion, but one evening after Vespers, she saw footprints in the convent corridor, bare, small, and dusted with gray ash. The following morning she was found unconscious in the chapel. Her rosary had been pulled apart, beads scattered in a perfect circle around her. When she recovered, she claimed she had seen a procession of veiled women, each carrying an infant swaddled in black cloth. They filed past her silently, and the last in line turned her face, one Sister Amara Divine, dead more than 20 years. Afterward, Mercy's sanity began to slip. Her final note before she was transferred to an infirmary reads simply: "They never left the house, it left them." Though dismissed by the church as delusion, her discovery reignited local memory. Farmers began reporting light moving under the soil, and the diocese quietly fenced off the ridge once more. The archived copy of her note was marked with a red X and labeled apocryphal disregard. But those who read it in secret saw one final line inked faintly at the bottom margin, written in a different hand entirely. "She saw what we sang." By 1872, the church's silence had turned from denial to deliberate forgetting. The land once home to the convent of Bethlehem had long since reverted to wilderness. Only the faintest outline of the chapel stones remained, half swallowed by mud and vine. But that autumn, the rains returned, longer and heavier than anyone could recall, and the Gasper River swelled beyond its banks, flooding the lower valleys. When the water finally receded, something strange was revealed. Children from a nearby farm discovered a fissure in the hillside where the old chapel once stood. The flood had torn open a section of the earth, exposing a brick archway and a set of narrow steps descending into darkness. The family alerted Reverend Silas Gentry, who gathered 2 parish men to inspect the site. His account, preserved in the parish log, describes what they found. The air was sweet, not foul as we expected, like perfume over decay. Our lamps showed walls of smooth stone, and the sound of dripping water echoed evenly, like measured breathing. Deeper in, they found remnants of wooden coffers, rotted, waterlogged, and beneath them, a stone altar carved with a single word, Mater. No bones remained, only silt and ash, but the men all agreed they heard a faint vibration through the stone floor, like the low hum of an organ far away. Reverend Gentry ordered the passage sealed again, but his report was confiscated by the diocesan office within the week. Later editions of the parish ledger omit that entry entirely, leaving only a blank page numbered 13. Locals, however, were not so easily dissuaded. After the rains, they noticed the river carried with it small relics, rosary beads, splinters of polished wood, even tiny bones smoothed clean by water. One farmer claimed a bead had floated to his door and clung to his threshold until morning. Another swore he found a tiny silver cross embedded in the bark of an apple tree. He cut the wood, but the shape of the cross remained dark and permanent beneath the surface. When the Sisters of Loretto sent an archivist to collect the items, she recorded that several of the beads bore etchings too small to see clearly, except under magnification. Each one held a single word, fiat, the Latin for let it be done. Afterward, no one dared disturb the hill again. Travelers said the ground still whispered when rain fell on it, and those who camped nearby claimed they heard voices murmuring in Latin between the thunder. The last surviving witness, Elias Boone, who had once worked the Minton farm, told his granddaughter before dying, "It's not the storm that hums. It's them, 10 of them, still praying that the church will finally answer back." The fissure filled in by itself within a year. The grass grew over it, the ground leveled. But when lightning struck the ridge, the valley still echoed, not with thunder, but with a low, resonant tone, as though the buried altar beneath still sang. In 1874, a quiet, meticulous woman named Eleanor Finch arrived in Bardstown to assist the diocese with the reorganization of old ecclesiastical records. She was a lay archivist, educated, skeptical, and entirely unaware that her assignment would lead her to what locals still called the Hill of 10 Voices. Among the brittle pages and water-damaged ledgers she was tasked to index, Eleanor discovered an envelope with no seal. Inside lay a folded parchment bearing only the words, "Do not restore what God buried." Beneath it rested an unmarked logbook, the ink nearly faded, its pages numbered backward, as if whoever kept it wanted the story to erase itself. Her first impulse was professional curiosity. The text began in 1847 and described in sparse, careful lines the pregnancies of 10 sisters, details matching the convent scandal that had once shaken Marion County. But as she read on, the handwriting changed. It became steadier, smaller, almost graceful. "We sing to keep the walls from closing," one line said. "We pray for those who built them." The final page bore a date, April 12, 1850, years after the convent had supposedly closed. Eleanor's superiors dismissed her find as forgery, yet that night she could not sleep. She claimed later that she heard faint humming, not from outside her lodging but from beneath the wooden floor. The sound was low and sorrowful, like a lullaby sung through stone. When she finally rose to light a candle, she saw footprints in the dust, bare, small, arranged in a circle. The next morning, she returned to the archives and found the parchment gone. Only a fine layer of gray ash remained where it had rested. In its place lay a note in a different hand, unsigned. You opened the ledger of light, now close your eyes. Weeks later, a leaner was found wandering near the Gasper River, soaked to the bone and clutching a rosary made of mismatched beads, half white, half black. She could not speak for days, but when her voice returned, she whispered the same phrase over and over. They are still in the walls. Her report, preserved in the diocesan annex under restricted holdings, concludes with one final entry, written in trembling script. I have seen the convent beneath the ground. Its halls shine with water. The sisters walk in silence, their faces calm, their hands full of light. They do not ask for release, they ask to be remembered. After her disappearance that winter, the archivists who replaced her refused to catalog the remaining boxes. Even today, her initials, EF, appear faintly penciled into the binding of the surviving ledgers, always beside one identical mark, a cross drawn upside down, intersected by 10 small dots. The church later dismissed her as unstable. Yet for years afterward, locals swore they saw a figure in a gray habit walking the ridge after rain, humming softly and holding something small that glowed between her palms, something that flickered like candlelight reflected on moving water. By 1876, the church had quietly reassigned every archivist who had handled the documents from the Bethlehem convent. The records themselves were sealed within the diocesan crypt beneath the Cathedral of St. Joseph in Bardstown. Officially, the scandal was forgotten, but the land and its silence would not stay buried. A new parish was established that year a few miles from the ridge, built with the intent of reclaiming ground for the faithful. The small wooden chapel was named Our Lady of the Repose, and its priest, Father Darius Coyle, was known for his practicality. He had no patience for ghost stories or church politics, and so the bishop thought him the perfect man for the post. Within weeks of his arrival, Coyle began keeping a private log, which survives in part. The earth hums when it rains. It is not thunder. The sound moves beneath the chapel floor like an echo with nowhere to go. He also recorded finding a faint scent of roses each morning before dawn, though no flowers were kept in the sanctuary. When he inquired about the odor, a visiting nun from the Sisters of Loretto told him it was a mark of old prayers that refused to die. But the unease deepened. During Lent, Coyle noticed condensation forming on the inside of the chapel windows, though the air outside was dry. On several panes, fingerprints appeared in pairs, small and smudged, as if pressed by unseen hands from within. There are more each night, he wrote, always 10. By Easter, he stopped saying Mass alone. Parishioners refused to kneel before the altar, claiming they felt the floor move beneath their knees. One woman fainted mid-prayer, insisting she had heard children singing below the boards. The choir had been silent at the time. Coyle's last entry is dated April 18, 1876. I opened the crawl beneath the altar. The air was warm. The soil there is not black but gray, and it smells faintly of milk and iron. I have seen what Sister Mercy wrote of. They do not sleep. They remember. After that, Coyle vanished. The parish's next priest found his Bible open to the Book of Lamentations, its pages damp as though from rain. On the back cover was drawn a single symbol, a cross pierced with 10 dots, the same mark once scrawled in a leaner Finch's ledgers. The bishop ordered the chapel boarded shut. It still stands, roof sagging, its bell missing its clapper. On stormy nights, locals say the wood still swells and exhales, like something breathing slow beneath it. And those who live close enough to hear the wind through the old rafters say the same phrase passes between the gusts. 10 voices, one vow, still singing. By 1878, the boarded chapel of Our Lady of the Repose had already decayed into ruin, its timbers sagging like the ribs of a collapsed chest. The parish officially no longer existed, yet the church bell, rusted and silent for years, began to ring again, only during storms and only once at a time. No hand pulled the rope. No mechanism remained intact. Locals said it was the 10th voice, the last of the convent's unseen choir, still calling from beneath the earth. A farmer named Nolan Price, who owned land below the ridge, tried to dismantle the bell tower in an effort to end the noise. He and his sons climbed it on a clear afternoon, the air dry and windless. When they struck the first hammer blow, the sound that answered was not metal on iron, but a long hollow note that seemed to come from the ground itself. One of the sons fled. The other collapsed, hands over his ears, shouting that the earth was screaming back. The following day, Price's fields flooded without rain. The water was clear, warm, and filled with flecks of white ash. It receded by morning, leaving a single circle of dead grass around the base of the old tower. After that, he refused to go near it. A local school teacher, Miss Alice Morton, recorded hearing the bell herself in 1879 while walking home after dusk. She described it in her diary. The tone was low and sorrowful, not warning but waiting. I felt as though someone beneath my feet had exhaled, after holding their breath too long. When she told this to Father Ronan Hale, a visiting Jesuit from Bardstown, he seemed deeply unsettled. Hale had studied the church's suppressed reports about the Bethlehem convent decades earlier, including the investigation into the Sisters of Loretto. He told her, "You heard not a bell, Miss Morton. You heard a vow." Determined to verify what he called the vibration, Hale spent 2 nights on the ridge. On the second, a storm rolled in from the east. Witnesses in town saw blue light flickering around the chapel ruins, and the air filled with a scent of milk and roses. By dawn, the storm was gone, and so was Father Hale. His umbrella and shoes were found near the altar stones, both dry despite the rain. Etched faintly into the rock was the phrase Mater auditus est, Latin for the mother has been heard. The church denied his disappearance, stating simply that he had returned to St. Louis, though no record of his arrival was ever found. Still, every year on that same week in April, the bell rings once, deep, clean, unmistakable, just before thunder breaks. And when it does, those who hear it fall silent, bow their heads, and whisper the old warning that has passed through generations. When the bell calls itself, someone below has remembered your name. By 1880, most in Marion County believed the tale of the convent to be superstition, an old wound bandaged by time. The ridge was overgrown with honeysuckle and cedar, the last stones of the chapel scattered like bones among the roots. Only a few elders kept the habit of crossing themselves when thunder echoed across the Gasper Valley. That summer, a traveling pilgrim arrived, Brother Alaric Dunn, a penitent who had walked barefoot from Louisiana claiming visions of women trapped in light. He carried a simple wooden staff and a pack filled with relics, none of them genuine, though he believed each to hold memory. Locals found him gentle if strange and offered him shelter in the ruins. He accepted gladly, saying, "This is where the ground prays by itself." The first night the rain came in sheets, and the valley swelled with water. Witnesses said they saw lanterns flickering on the ridge, though no road led there. Brother Alaric was heard singing, no words, only tone, until the early hours when the sound changed. It became many voices, harmonizing perfectly in the rhythm of falling rain. The next morning his staff was found upright beside the chapel stones, the wood damp but unrotted, its tip sunk neatly into the soil. He was gone. The sheriff ordered a search. In the mud near the bell tower they found 10 sets of footprints, all bare, leading toward the river, and stopping where the current turned black with storm runoff. No prints returned. Only the faint scent of roses lingered in the wet air. Weeks later, a letter arrived at the Bardstown diocese bearing no name, its writing cramped and hurried. The vow is fulfilled. They sing now not for mercy but remembrance. When the bell breathes again, follow the rain. It leads to their peace. The handwriting matched none on record. Yet on the letter's back, faintly pressed into the parchment, appeared the same recurring symbol, the cross intersected by 10 dots. By autumn, travelers along the Lebanon Road began to report hearing chants carried by wind, echoing through the cedar groves. Not haunting, they said, but solemn, as though 10 women were still keeping the hours of prayer. The church forbade any further pilgrimage to the ridge. But when the rains returned, the sound came again, stronger, clearer, unmistakably human. The valley itself seemed to breathe in rhythm with the melody. Some said they saw figures kneeling in the mist, veils flowing like water, their heads bowed toward the earth that had once hidden them. To this day, on nights when the river rises high and the air smells faintly of milk and ash, locals claim you can still hear the last note of that unseen choir fade across the hills, 10 voices joined in one, waiting for an answer that has never come. By 1882, the ridge and its haunted silence had nearly slipped from living memory. Only priests and archivists in Bardstown whispered its name now, usually behind closed doors. Yet that spring, the diocese received a crate of curiosities from the ruins, objects found by local woodcutters clearing cedar near the old chapel site. Inside were 10 wax candles, each blackened at the base but pristine at the wick, as though untouched by flame. Wrapped around them was a length of rosary cord half white, half dark brown. No one could determine how long the candles had been buried, or why they still carried the faint scent of milk and roses. They were taken to Father Ignatius Pell, a scholar of theology who had once served among the Sisters of Loretto. Pell documented each candle meticulously, noting that when placed in the same room, their wicks leaned toward one another, drawn as if by a shared current of air. On the 7th night of his study, he claimed to hear a faint humming through the glass case where they were kept, 10 distinct tones forming a single chord. He ordered them sealed again immediately. The following month, Bardstown residents reported an unseasonal storm. Lightning struck the cathedral's bell tower but left no mark. Instead, the bell began ringing on its own, just once, the same low, hollow tone heard years before at Our Lady of the Repose. When the bell fell silent, the candles in Pell's office were found half melted though no flame had touched them. The melted wax had pooled into the shape of small footprints crossing his desk. Pell's written account concludes, "They are not warning us, they are remembering together. The vow is their eternity." The church removed the relics from Bardstown soon after. The official explanation, objects of uncertain origin. Yet one attendant confessed that the candles emitted warmth even after being locked away. "Like someone breathing through glass," he said. By late autumn, another rumor circulated that 10 sisters' graves in Loretto Cemetery had begun to sink evenly, as though the earth beneath them were moving. Each headstone bore only a first name, but all dated to the same month, April 1847. The groundskeeper wrote a single line in his log that year. "They are finally side by side again." When the wind passes through Bardstown today, the bells still give a faint harmonic murmur before rain, and archivists swear that every April, one drawer in the restricted section slides open on its own. The one labeled Bethlehem Convent, 1847–1852. Inside lies nothing but a fragment of rosary string, its beads forever alternating light and dark, as if to remind whoever dares look that vows, once spoken, do not die, they sing. By 1884, Kentucky's spring turned to flood again. Heavy rain darkened the valleys and carved new rivers through old ground. One of those channels ran straight through the ridge that had once held the House of Silence. For weeks the water raged, devouring fence posts and washing away the topsoil, until even the stubbornest farmers conceded the land had a will of its own. When the rain finally stopped, the ridge lay changed, the surface slick with clay, the old chapel's last stones exposed like bones. Among them, travelers found 10 small hollows filled with clear water. Each hollow shimmered faintly at dusk, glowing as though lit from within. The locals called them the 10 candles of the earth. That summer, an aging priest named Father Corbett Duval made a pilgrimage to the site. He had served briefly at Bardstown decades earlier, when the first scandal had broken, and had carried the memory like a private wound. His diary tells of his visit. "The air trembled with music, though no voice was raised. When I stepped between the pools, the sound ceased. I knelt to pray but could not find words. The earth prayed for me." He returned to Bardstown and delivered one final sermon before withdrawing from the ministry. Witnesses say he spoke gently, almost serenely. A vow once broken is a river. It finds its way to the sea, no matter how many hands try to dam it. After his death, the rosary found among his things bore beads of alternating colors, white, black, strung in perfect balance. The inscription on the cross read only Memorare, Latin for remember. By 1885, the pools began to dry. Grass overtook them, and the ridge settled into quiet again. But travelers who passed by still spoke of a sound beneath their feet, a low hum that rose and fell like breathing. And on nights when lightning flickered across the hills, the air filled with a sweetness, that same scent of milk and roses, lingering long after the storm. The Sisters of Loretto never reclaimed the ground, though they did add a single line to their annual chronicle that year. Bethlehem sleeps in grace, her daughters keep watch in silence. For the people of Marion County, the story faded into something closer to reverence. They no longer called it scandal or curse, but the vow that sings. Children were warned never to whistle near the ridge after dark, lest their tune be echoed back in tenfold harmony. And so, a century later, the land remains untouched, its name erased from every new map, but its hum alive in every thunderstorm that rolls across Kentucky. Those who live nearest still pause when the sky opens, listening for the faint, haunting chord that the earth itself seems to play. They say it's not the past calling. It's the ground remembering. By 1887, Bardstown had changed. The church was rebuilding its reputation, and the last few priests who remembered the scandal of Bethlehem Convent were either retired or buried. But one structure, the diocesan archive, still held the sealed ledgers, letters, and candles retrieved from that distant ridge. Few dared to enter its lowest chamber, the annex of special holdings, where the air was always a little too warm, and the scent of candle wax never faded. That spring, Archivist Thomas Kerr was appointed to modernize the records. He was a quiet, steady man, skeptical of anything that hinted at legend. He spent his first days sorting parish accounts, unconcerned by the superstitious glances of the older clerks. "If there are ghosts here," he said, "they keep excellent filing habits." On the fifth night of his work, thunder rolled across the horizon. The storm never reached town, but the air turned electric. Kerr reported hearing what he called a thin singing from the lower hall, rhythmic and low, like wind through glass pipes. He went below with a lantern. His notes end there, but the night watchman who found the aftermath wrote a full page of description. The room was undisturbed save one corner, where the locked case labeled Bethlehem 1847-1852 had burst open from within. The glass was cracked outward, not shattered. The smell of roses filled the room, sweet and sour, and where the candles once lay, only ash remained, arranged in the shape of 10 rings. Kerr himself was gone. The only thing left on his desk was a half-finished transcription of one of the convent letters. The final line he copied read, "If they burn us, we will burn bright enough to be remembered." 2 days later, the archive caught fire. Witnesses claimed it began without spark or smoke, just sudden heat and light that spread along the lower floor. When the flames subsided, everything within the annex had been consumed, yet the rest of the building stood intact. The bishop declared it an accident, though the firefighters insisted they smelled milk amid the smoke. In the ashes, investigators found Kerr's crucifix melted into the floorboards. Beneath it, untouched by flame, lay a single bead from the vanished rosary, half white, half black. That summer, lightning struck the ridge near the old convent, igniting dry brush. Locals rushed to put out the fire, but it burned only the hilltop, circling itself neatly. When the flames died, the soil within the ring was unscorched, fresh, clean, almost new. And for the first time in living memory, the ground made no sound. No hum, no echo, only silence, perfect and complete. The church called it closure. The townsfolk called it mercy. But an old farmer watching from his porch said something different. They finally stopped singing because someone finally listened. To this day, the site remains fenced off. Wildflowers grow in strange patterns, 10 clusters that bloom each spring no matter the weather. And when rain falls heavy on Bardstown, the church bells tremble without ringing, as though remembering a song they once carried for those who were never allowed to speak. By 1890, few in Kentucky remembered the name Bethlehem Convent. The ridge had grown thick with wild cedar, its history fading into rumor. The church had built new parishes farther south, and Bardstown's old archives stood quiet, their surviving ledgers half empty, half ash. But memory, once woken, does not die easily. That autumn, an unusual storm rolled across the region, no thunder, no lightning, just heavy, endless rain. The towns along the Gasper Valley lost power for days. In the middle of the downpour, several witnesses in Bardstown claimed to see light rising from the old cemetery hill, a pale glow that pulsed in rhythm like a heartbeat. Some said it took shape, 10 faint outlines, veiled figures standing in a circle, facing inward. Among those who saw it was Mother Beatrice Callan, the oldest surviving member of the Sisters of Loretto. In her testimony, later sealed in the Order's Chronicle, she wrote, "They were not ghosts. They were the memory of vows kept in silence. I saw them turn their faces toward the cathedral and bow their heads." That same week, the cathedral bell in Bardstown rang once deep, hollow, though the tower had long been abandoned. When the clergy inspected it, they found the air inside thick with the scent of roses and smoke. On the wooden floor lay 10 small circles of soot, each perfectly round, each cool to the touch. In nearby Marion County, the ridge was transformed by floodwater once again. The old chapel stones shifted, uncovering what appeared to be a shallow foundation. A group of townsmen dug there and found a row of glass fragments buried in black clay, pieces of the original convent windows, long thought destroyed. The shards were cloudy, but when held up to the sky, they reflected faint colors, blues and golds, forming the shapes of faces, their expressions calm, eyes closed. Some swore the glass pulsed with warmth. The fragments were gathered into a box and sent to Bardstown for safekeeping, but they never arrived. The wagon that carried them was found overturned on the road the next morning, horses unharmed, driver missing. The box lay cracked open beside the ditch, empty. Later that year, reports spread of pilgrims visiting the ridge to pray. They spoke of feeling warmth beneath the ground and of hearing faint hymns woven into the sound of rain. One visitor, a professor from Lexington, described it in a letter to his wife. "It's not haunting, it's remembrance. The ground itself seems to breathe, 10 slow sighs at a time." By Christmas, the storm had long passed, but the fields below the ridge remained damp, refusing to dry. Even in frost, the soil steamed gently, as if exhaling after years of being buried. The church never reopened the investigation. But the people of Marion County stopped calling the ridge cursed. They began lighting candles at its edge every Holy Week, 10 at a time, and each flame was said to flicker in a rhythm, faint and steady, like the beating of a heart beneath the earth. By 1892, the ridge was quiet again. The pilgrims had gone, the candles long extinguished, and the cedar trees had begun reclaiming the hilltop. Only one person still visited regularly, Sister Agnes Byon, a nurse from the Sisters of Loretto Infirmary. She came every month, walking alone from Bardstown, her gray habit damp with morning dew. Locals said she was the last of the original order to remember what the church had buried. Her journal survives, thin and weathered, its last pages trembling with uncertainty. In it she describes the ridge as a place neither blessed nor forsaken, only waiting. She wrote of standing in silence for hours listening. "There is no song now," she said, "but there is breath, steady and low, like the world remembering to exhale." That spring, lightning struck the cedar grove without thunder. The trees caught briefly and then went out, leaving the ground warm and steaming. When Sister Agnes arrived days later, she found the soil pale and smooth as though fire had polished it. In the center lay 10 small impressions, shallow, rounded, the size of kneeling hands. She knelt there and prayed until nightfall. Her final entry, dated April 13, 1892, reads, "I have seen them at peace. Their faces were turned upward, their eyes closed, their lips still moving but not in grief. They are praying for us now." After that, Sister Agnes vanished on her return walk. Her habit and rosary were found folded by the roadside, untouched by rain. The beads had fused together, one half white, the other black, melted into a single seamless strand. The following week, parishioners in Bardstown reported a strange phenomenon. During evening mass, the cathedral bell began to sway though the air was still. It did not toll. Instead, a soft vibration filled the room, humming through the pews, gentle and steady like the breath of something immense beneath the earth. The priest paused mid-sermon and simply said, "They are forgiven." Since then, the ridge has remained uninhabited. The earth there stays warm even in winter, and wildflowers bloom in perfect circles of 10. The church's records name the site only once more, in a handwritten note added to a ledger in 1895. Bethlehem Convent, redeemed by silence. And so, the story ends where it began, in a quiet Kentucky valley, where vows buried beneath stone learned to sing through soil, storm, and memory. The scandal became legend, the legend devotion, and the devotion a whisper that has never truly ceased. Even now, on spring nights when thunder moves without lightning and the air smells faintly of roses and rain, the people of Marion County pause their prayers and listen. For if you stand still enough, they say, you can hear 10 voices beneath the wind, calm, harmonic, and endless, keeping the hours that the living forgot.